Hello, and thank you for tuning into our channel once again. My name is Dennis Morris, and I'm the minister for the Jefferson Church of Christ in Jefferson, Texas. Just glad to have you with us. We're in John chapter 6, and we've already seen how that Jesus fed the 5,000. Now, after Jesus did that, we find there in John chapter 6 and verse 15, it says, "When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone." Somebody might say, well, wait a minute now. I thought that's what Jesus wanted. I thought he wanted to be king. Matter of fact, there are those who say that Jesus came to be an earthly king, and yet because the Jews rejected him, he was not able to do so. Well, at this moment in time, they wanted to make him a king. If he had determined to become an earthly king, he would have become an earthly king. It would not have mattered who stood in his way. But the point being is simply this: Jesus never promised to come to this earth to be an earthly king. We find that he, as the Messiah, came to deliver, but to deliver men from sin. That's why Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. And so Jesus even said when he was talking to Pilate that his kingdom was not of this world. If his kingdom were of this world, then would his disciples fight. In other words, if Jesus came to be an earthly king, there would have been no one who could have stood in the way of him becoming an earthly king. But that's not what his intentions were. His intention was to come and to establish a spiritual kingdom. Not an earthly kingdom, but a spiritual kingdom. And that spiritual kingdom, of course, is the church. And we, of course, can talk more about that, but that's an interesting point being made here. Notice it says this in verse 16, "And when evening was now come, his disciples went down to the sea, and entered into a boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum, and it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them." But then notice what it says in verse 19. "So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. But he said unto them, It is I, be not afraid. And they willingly received him into the ship. Immediately the ship was at the land whither they went." Now, of course, we find that John talks about Jesus walking on the water here, and what they saw and how that they were afraid. And yet Jesus, of course, calmed their fears, and he entered into the boat. Remember, there's other accounts in the other Gospels that add these things as well as other things. And what we have to do when we come to the Gospels is this. We have to take all of the Gospels and put them together because they will harmonize one with another. It's just like eyewitnesses. For example, if an accident occurred and the policeman went around and he asked individuals, "Did you see the accident?" Well, one individual may focus on one thing. Another individual may focus on something else. Now, does it mean that one or the other individual are wrong in their testimony? The answer is no. They just had a focus on something different than the other. And yet, the police officer, as he goes around to all of the witnesses and he talks to them, then he is able to have an overall view of what took place in the accident. And so, as a result, he can draw a proper conclusion. And that is something that we need to do when we come to the Gospels. We need to say, well, what did Matthew say about it? What did Mark say about it? What did Luke say about it? What did John say about it? And as a result, you find that some talk more about it than others. Some bring it up. Others go into greater detail because of their focus as to what they were trying to say. John, of course, shows here that Jesus performed yet another miracle. We find that he fed the 5,000. He left the crowd because they wanted to make him king, and he was not going to be an earthly king. And now we find that when the disciples went out on the Sea of Galilee, how that Jesus went to them walking on the water. Now, other gospel accounts shows that Peter, of course, wanted to walk to Jesus, and he began to do so. But when he saw the storms and took the storm and the waves, and took his eyes off of Jesus, he began to sink, and Jesus reached out and grabbed him, and they were both in the boat. And so that's a little bit extra there added to what is being talked about here by John. But John brings out the point that Jesus walked on the water, which once again shows yet another miracle. Now, could you imagine being one of the disciples, seeing Jesus walking on the water coming toward the boat? Would you have been afraid just as they were? And then to see Jesus come into the boat and just in your mind say, how in this world can that be possible? Well, the reason it was possible because Jesus is the Son of God. And that was one of those miracles that Jesus did to prove that fact. Well, thank you for tuning in today. If you would, please join us again tomorrow as we continue our study in John chapter 6.